3. School reunion. Our Doris is organising a school reunion. I've no idea why, since half of our classmates are dead and the other half have been written off as too close to the underclasses to correctly employ the proper decorum necessary for a themed dinner party. But that's our Doris for you. She once invited the big issue man to afternoon tea because she wanted to show off to Violet Grey that she cared about those in difficult circumstances. Once he left, she had the upholstery steam cleaned and the couch disinfected. It's all to do with this bleeding garden safari. Our Doris thinks that if she can get Janice Dooley of Little Street in the same room, then she can convince her that our house is best suited to Fifth House. I tell you, I'd rather throw myself to a pack of rabid hyenas than spend one more night talking about shrubs and whether I could possibly move my shed to a more discreet location, somewhere no one would associate it with our Doris. I said to her, why don't I just camouflage it, our Doris, and save you the bother? She said, would you? And to cut a long story short, I spent the best part of Saturday putting floral cellophane all over my shed. Our Doris weren't happy either way because I'd used pound stretcher dustbin covers. She said to me, what have you done that for, Arold? They're nothing short of working class. Imagine what Marcia at number 47 will say. She'd be on the telephone to Pandra straight away to say as I've made another social faux pas. I said to her, I suppose I should have found a long-lost Lowry. She gave me the look and said, you make me out to be some sort of harridan, Arold. Though a long-lost Lowry might appeal to some, I am a humble housewife who would be quite pleased with an eclectic fabric from Laura Ashley. I said I were going to the Hare and Horse and she rang a cousin in Mobberley. After my second half had calmed down slightly, not much mind you, I'd still sooner pave over the garden bury our Doris beneath the conservatory, but we were getting somewhere. Alf showed up about 6. He were on the run from the coppers. Something about a misunderstanding with the manager of a bargain booze to do with misplacing 3 bottles of brown ale up his sleeves and down his trousers. He said as it weren't his fault he'd lost weight, but the manager weren't buying it. I bought him a pint anyway. He could tell something were up. His Edith said as if I were to support his alcohol habit much longer, she would tell our Doris about my reading the Daily Mirror. I tell you, the women in this town are like the bloody SS. If Hitler had our Doris, I'd be eating bratwurst right now. Alf said to me, what's she done now? Well, if I didn't go up like a bottle of pop, I don't know what I did. She's planning a school reunion to get back in touch with Janice Dooley. Had me bending over backwards. I've been to Crewe, to Chester, to Manchester. She'll have me going to Outer Bleed in Mongolia next, all so she can get on this garden safari. I wouldn't mind if she did any of the work, but she can't tell the difference between hyacinth and hibiscus, can that woman? I should have listened to my mother. If you'd listened to your mother, you'd be a monk, and no man's built for celibacy. No man's built for our Doris, I can tell thee. I don't remember getting home, but I did wake up in a wheelbarrow, soaked to the skin, our Doris standing over me with an empty mop bucket in her hand. Harold, if you would be ever so kind as to wake up, the neighbours are getting worried. And with that, our Doris scuttled off into the kitchen. Some part of me wished it could have been that easy, that our Doris hadn't realised I were drunk and had thrown the bucket of water to make sure I weren't dead. When you've been married for as long as I have, you get to know your wife, and when your wife happens to be Doris, you question whether you'd have better chance hiding from the Gestapo. Our Doris went into the kitchen and got out the Pyrex dish. It's always bad when she decides to make a casserole. When Mrs. Dunlop of Forges Row refused to let her star as Maria in The Sound of Music, said as she were too old and wouldn't she like the part of a nun. The house were jam-packed with every sort of casserole from lamb to butternut squash. She gave the postman 3 because he delivered the gas bill on time. I staggered out of my wheelbarrow and into the kitchen. Once you get older, you don't so much as get a hangover as wonder whether you've reached the end. I dosed up on paracetamol, statins and a few more drugs to keep me older for longer and looked at our Doris. Before I'd opened my mouth, she said to me, I say, she said, it were reminiscent of a growl. If you've ever wondered what a dragon sounds like, I'm sure you'd come close if you heard our Doris hissing at me. She said to me, we've been married for half a century, Harold, and I have never been more embarrassed than this morning. I thought maybe you'd done the considerate thing and had a heart attack, but no! Who should I receive a telephone call from but Janice Dooley herself? Can you tell me what you were doing walking past my place of residence at 6 o'clock this morning? Our Doris raised her eyebrows at this like an old headmaster. I wouldn't have minded if she'd beaten me. I spent 50 years trying to develop a fetish, but once you hit 74, I suppose all that goes out the window, like being able to get a full night's sleep without the threat of wetting yourself. I looked down at myself, but the only damp patches had been flung from our Doris's mop bucket. I looked her in the eye and I said to her, "Do you think I'd have an affair, our Doris? I tell thee it's enough being married to you. I don't have time enough in the world for Janice Dooley of Little Street." "I should think not," she said. "Not when you're supposed to be helping me get fifth house." I don't know why I said what I said next. I think maybe it was a drink talking. Either that or dementia. I think if you can't claim senility when you've been old for as long as I have, then there's something wrong with the world. I said to her, "And Lord have mercy on my soul," I said. "I've had enough of your garden safari, our Doris." She didn't give me the look. I could have coped with the look. After 54 years of marriage, you get used to your wife having eyes like nuclear missiles. No. What she did next? Well, I'd never have thought it of our Doris. She once argued with a toddler when he cut the line at the co-op. Our Doris put down the casserole dish and left the house. She took her floral print Cat Kidston bag and Laura Ashley coat that was not dissimilar yet made for quite a startling contrast and left the house. I didn't think much of it. She might have thought I'd followed her, but I was soaked through to me skin, hungover and in need of a bacon sandwich. Our Doris has had 50 years of my time. I'd be glad to have a few hours alone. I did what any man would have done in my situation. I stayed home. I have learnt in my lifetime that it's best not to follow our Doris unless you are well dressed and your manner is impeccable and you happen to be royalty. Otherwise she's liable to ignore you until she finds a policeman, at which point she will claim that you've been harassing her and have you spend the remainder of the day behind bars. This is how I spent our 30th anniversary. Our Doris had her eyes set on this new restaurant in the middle of town. They had the kind of serviettes that weren't made of paper and low lighting, and the mayor had opened the place. A proper certified do that she wasn't invited to. I said to her, "What do you want to go there for anyway, our Doris? You're short-sighted enough as it is. Without light so dim you'd think there'd been a power cut." She'd insisted. She said to me, "Janice Dooley has already been seen in a booth with Mr. Todd, and his divorce has only just come through. You'll be able to get a reservation, Arald. I am a reputable member of the WI." I must have tried for days to get a reservation, ringing every few hours to see if someone had cancelled, popping in when I had a few minutes off work. Then I got the phone call. A cancellation. Somebody's birthday party wouldn't be happening because they'd broken their ankle on a helter-skelter in Grimsby. I told our Doris I'd got a reservation. She bought herself a new dress from one of those boutique shops and had her hair done. She looked a dream. We parked in front of the restaurant. She'd given her coat to the maitre d', was scouting the place like a lioness after a gazelle. And they had no reservation for us. Her eyes glazed over, lips pursed. She gripped her purse with all the rage of a scorpion under her boot, and she stormed over to the diary. She found our name set for the next day. I said to her, "I must have got me dates mixed up, our Doris. We'll come back tomorrow." She got a coat and walked away. I might have spent the night in a cell for stalking a middle-aged woman, but it was the best night's sleep I'd had in the last 30 years. If our Doris isn't snoring, she's regaling me with tales about Violet Grey and her arthritic hip. If I'm honest, I didn't mind her leaving me in the house on my own. You can't watch an episode of The Royal with our Doris going on about how she could have been an actress if her career at Gadsden and Taylor hadn't taken off. She had one line as second shopkeeper in the Partridge Mews Amdram production of Annie in 1975 and still maintains it was the best chorus role anyone in the town has ever seen. No, it were peaceful in the house without our Doris. More so than when she had laryngitis and used that ballon notepad to heckle me every 5 minutes. I brought my Daily Mirror inside and drank tea from a mug. I watched Groundforce and paused it whenever Charlie Dimmock lunged with a trowel. It were bliss. I didn't have to think about the garden safari and have our Doris ask if I think it's strange how Janice Dooley of Little Street and Doug Gray are always away at the same time. Sometimes I wonder whether I'm a bit unfair on Janice. Then I remember she once tried to accost me in a little car park. I don't know what I were more afraid of. Our Doris finding out that Janice Dooley had tried it on, or our Doris finding out I parked at Lidl and walked into town because the car park were free. Either way, Janice walked into a retractable bollard and got taken to casualty. I don't often agree with our Doris's vendetta, but when it comes to Janice Dooley of Little Street, the entire town's in agreement. I should have known my amnesty wouldn't last. She'd only been gone for 3 hours when I received the phone call. When our Doris is here, she goes all posh. Likes to announce our address, surname and our names in case the caller were to get mistaken. She once had a cold caller hang up because she started harping on about how she'd used the same hairdresser since 1985 and she weren't sure she would recommend the use of foreign shampoo and conditioner, and didn't the caller know that Doris had an Avon lady who saw to all of her cosmetic requirements. So, I were happy to answer the phone with a mild hello, and didn't I hit a problem straight away. The familiar hush of breathing hissed down the receiver like a python with bronchitis. I heard her take a puff on her cigarette. Imagined her thinking of what to have a go at first, my abysmal telephone manner, or how I had treated our Doris. Because I knew we were calling all right. I have lived with our Doris for 54 years. We have seen some horrible things together. Gastroenteritis, caftans, bomber jackets, and runcorn. And this woman, this veritable thorn in my side, has always been there to throw a spanner in the works. Our Doris has a cousin, and her name is Mavis. I first met Mavis when me and Doris were courting. I knew of her because the lads down the youth club used to say as if you wanted to get to Doris, you had to get past a guard dog, Mavis. Now, she's always been small as Mavis, has the look of one of those china dolls you keep in a glass cabinet. Pity they ever let her out. I didn't make the best first impression, if I'm honest, but I had no idea what she looked like. Everyone said as she and Doris were like sisters, inseparable in looks and attitudes. Everyone must have been ruddy blind. Either that or the entire town is charitable, and if you saw the way they treated the youth choir, you'd know that were a lie. I were picking up our Doris for a trip to the pictures. I'd got me polo jumper on, the worst design ever known to man. If you ever want to strangle yourself by a polo jumper. I got to the front door and who answers but Mavis. Yellow fingernails and a dodgy perm even in the 60s. And she gave me this look like a snake sizing up whether you'll fit in its mouth, and she said to me, I told Doris to see the optician, but she didn't listen, and now look at her, stepping out with a weasel in a neck brace. Thing must be low on the ground. She then told me the tale of how our Doris could be with a jazz musician from Netheralderley, but he played on Friday nights. I might have told her he'd clearly been scared off by gargoyle on front step as our Doris came into the hall. And that's how it began. 54 years of wedded bliss, and Mavis. Mavis, who were on the other end of the phone breathing like it were going out of fashion. And then she spoke. Her words that pronounced she could have been speaking clock, and she said like it were the news, like I hadn't noticed me, like a spouse, she said. Doris isn't at your house. And I knew where she'd gone. I said to her, and it were my long-standing hatred for Mavis that made me say, do you know, Mavis, I hadn't noticed. I thought she were in the living room watching Alan Titchmarsh. Now listen here, Harold Copeland. Doris is fed up of being abused by a labour-worshipping socialist layabout. Until you mend your ways, she'll be staying here with me. And I said, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You should know that. Your husband gave up trying. And I put the phone down. I shouldn't have brought her Percy up, but there was nothing I could do about it now I'd said it. Besides, I'd had enough of our Doris. The only reason she turns to Mavis is because they're both as selfish as each other. Doris never once asked whether I'd help her in the garden safari. I didn't mind doing it at first, but that business with my shed were uncalled for. I thought, let her stay at Mavis's. Since they had phone in my hand, I did what any sensible man with 3 evening calls would do. I gave in and caught lads. Alf arrived within half hour, bottle of White Lightning under one arm and a 6-pack of pork pies under other. I had a run to Tesco, only just escaped with me Multon Mowbrays, the tightening security, Harold. It might be to stop the pensioners stealing the savoury goods. He said, it's refrigerated. I rolled my eyes at that and pointed him in direction at fridge. Alf has always had a thing for nicking things. He'll never steal off his family, but he has got a thing about robbing pork pies. When we were lads, we used to go to Co-op. Our Doris had a way with a pricing gun that could make a younger Harold hot under the collar, and Alf couldn't help but stick his hands in pick and mix. He spent his life saying they let him off because no one noticed his pickpocketing prowess. I think they let him because they knew his uncle had a bad war, and he'd always get the money back one way or another, usually by overcharging him for Christmas raffle down cricket club. Once Alf got him self-acquainted with Doris's Brussels pâté, the kind she buys from Dally that is half the amount as Aldi but costs twice as much, the lads started showing up. Some brought drink, some brought turnips. It separates men from gardeners, does a drink in our Doris's kitchen. It doesn't matter whether or not she's here. Peter still weren't over our Doris stepping in his prized marrow. He couldn't speak to me for a few weeks after. I kept me head low, stuck to brief nod at head. He were more faithful to that marrow than he was to his wife. There was still that business between him and Cheryl from Ayr North when they disappeared for 2 hours with a plate of haggis and a bottle of whiskey at the Burns night celebrations. But that marrow, if that marrow got chilly, it knitted a bleeding scarf. And now he sat at the kitchen table making fast work of a 12-pack of Skol on the table. I didn't blame him, but I'm not sure a squashed marrow can merit alcoholism. I'm not the sort of man to stop another from his drunken endeavours. If there's anything I learnt from our Doris's mother, it's that if you try and take the drink away, they'll find a new one after they've clouted you for taking theirs in the first place. I also wanted to join the lot of them. Me and the allotment lads took the party to the living room. I switched the telly onto the BBC so we could watch Alex Jones interview some up-and-coming about something we didn't care about. The one show over and it were back to me recording and Charlie Dimmock. They might get some new young pieces on the telly, but I always go back to the old favourites. Even as I sunk into one of Al's pork pies, I could hear our Doris making a fuss because of my objectification of women. That first night when we were at the flick, she caught me glancing at her breasts. I said to her, I'm a man, our Doris, I'm going to look at your breasts. And she said to me, if you even want to get close to looking at my breast, then you'll stop treating me like a dirty magazine. I am a woman, Harold Copeland. That doesn't give you the right to think my mammary glands were invented for your pleasure. She made a point of buying her own popcorn and sitting 3 rows behind me. She left before the national anthem had finished playing and I had to stand through it. She had to wait for me because I'd brought her in my car, but she didn't speak to me for 4 weeks afterward. It might have been Mavis. It might have been my objectification in a feminine form. I'm still not sure. It's only been 54 years. You've got to give a man a chance. Once I couldn't stand up, I'm not sure what happened. I'm not denying that getting blind drunk 2 nights in a row is a bad thing. I'm not denying that I made some stupid choices and that I spent 3 hours the next morning worrying about my blood pressure and what Doris would say when she finally cottoned onto the loss of one of her Royal Dalton saucers. The first time I ever broke one of our Doris's cups, I thought she'd skin me alive. We'd been married for 7 years and our Doris had just served the afternoon tea to her friends from the WI. This was before the days of the church hall. They'd meet in the living room and discuss whether or not trifles could still be seen as a dessert in respectable society, or whether they should be resigned to the underclasses who currently plague the council development. I was late home from work. Something to do with a bad delivery of gnomes. They'd all been delivered with the feet on backwards. The manufacturer said as they had a dyslexic assistant online. I found our Doris in the kitchen cleaning crockery. She said to me, "You're late." I said, "I hadn't noticed, our Doris." She said, "Don't get cheeky with me, Harold. What if you've been murdered? How will I explain that to the WI? You're not the kind of man who gets murdered on his way home from work." I said, "I work at a garden centre, our Doris." "You're a purveyor of horticultural goods and don't you go around forgetting it in front of Violet Grey. That's all I need is her going on about her husband is doing well at the factory. You could have gone on the line. You'd be manager by now." I shouldn't have mimicked her words, but we'd had that conversation about 50,000 times in the last 3 years, and it always ended up with me not being as good as Doug Gray. It weren't the first time I'd received a look, but it were back in the early days before it'd been properly refined, more of a squint than a proper burning gaze. And she said to me, all serious-like, clearly channeling her mother, or a boarhound, she said, "It will do to have some aspirations, Harold. Just think about it. Wouldn't you like it if we could retire to a nice cottage in the Cotswolds?" I said I wouldn't, and she threw the cup. She missed. The cup shattered and she said nothing. She collected the dustpan and brush from beneath the sink and cleared it up. Her silence spoke volumes. I spent the next 3 weeks getting in touch with manufacturers and wholesalers until I found the right match, and even then she made me drink from a mug. Anyway, I did my best at cleaning up the living room. I checked all the pots, vases, cupboards and drawers, anywhere someone could have thrown the guts up. I checked and found tons of vomit. I had to thank heavens for small mercies that they'd stayed clear of the sofa. They might have felt the urge to throw up, but at least they'd remembered whose house they were in and kept away from our Doris's upholstery. I spent the best part of 3 hours going around the house cleaning. It weren't to a Doris standard, but it'd pass. And then I found Alf on the kitchen floor, our Doris's tablecloth around him like it were an eider down in the middle of winter, though it must have been cold against the hardwood flooring. I had to bang a few plates around to wake him up. And he didn't flinch. I said to him, "How can you be sober?" "I line me stomach," he said, "with pork pies." I caught our Doris's tablecloth as he dropped it. "With Melton Mowbray, best there is." One glance at the clock and he hopped out the back door. No thought to if I needed any help tidying up, but that's friends for you. There to help you make the mess, but gone when you need to clear it. Now I had to tackle the washing machine, and this is where I realised they hadn't used it since our Doris had me fork out a few £100 for her top-of-the-range washing machine in 2005. I said to myself, "You have lived with her for over half a century. A washing machine is child's play." I opened the drawer for the washing powder, but we didn't have washing powder. We had some sort of gunge that I squeezed into some sort of pot. I had to get my reading glasses out of the bedroom, and then I realised I hadn't turned the bed over, so I took the sheets back downstairs with me, filled the machine to discover that you had to put the gunge in first. It explicitly says, first instruction, you can't miss it, and I'd done what anyone would do and put my washing in the washing machine before anything else. So I had to take all of that out, but then I didn't know what number you turned it to. On the old machine it had been a 4, but our Doris wouldn't be happy if I shrunk her bed linen. She'd had them on order from British Home Stores. You could show them to your guests and they wouldn't think you were being too pretentious, but on the right side of house proud. All Doris's idea. Personally, I don't care as long as I don't get bed sores. I had no choice but to ring our Angela. She answered on the first ring. She said, "What's up, Dad?" "How'd you know it was me?" "Auntie Mavis rang." "She did she?" "Yes. Now what's up?" She's nothing like her mother is our Angela, unless you count the middle-class views with a slight penchant for over-cleanliness, but she knows how to look after her father, does our Angela, and I know better than to pretend with her. I said, "I can't work the washing machine." "You can't work the washing machine? Your mother never lets me. Is it turned on?" And I can hear her smirking down the phone. I said to her, "It's no use laughing, our Angela. Can you imagine the uproar if I mixed a colour with a white and destroyed one of your mother's Laura Ashley two-pieces?" "You'd find it hard since she has them dry cleaned," she said. "Have you put the fabric softener in?" "Is that the stuff that looks like something out of Ghostbusters?" "I'm coming over. Don't touch anything." Within the half hour, our Angela had set about the kitchen. She switched the washing machine on, made a brew, and were just starting on the washing up when the doorbell went. I said I'd get it and lumbered down the hall. Not many folk visit us, and if they do, they're of the mind to ring first, so I had no idea who it were until I saw the shadow through the frosted glass. The way she stood with her nose in the air like she was searching the heavens for something told me who she were. I opened the door, and there she stood. Violet Grey. I knew things were bad as soon as I laid eyes on her. I only ever see her at parties or supermarkets, or that time she ran into the gents hoping to catch her husband at it. I don't know where he finds the energy for extramarital affairs. He's getting on for 76 himself, and he were the first to have a new knee. And now his wife were on my doorstep. She said to me, all pursed lips and saggy cheeks, "Aren't you going to invite me in, Mr. Copeland?" I said to her, "Why?" "For a chat," she said. "A chat?" I stepped to block the door. If our Doris knew us had let Violet Grey into a kitchen that were less than spotless, she'd have me dentures for a necklace. I said to Violet, "What could we have to chat about?" And she said, all mock concern, as though the idea hadn't been percolating for the last 3 days, she said, "Mrs. Copeland's state of mind." "What about it?" I said. And this is where she gets cocky. She's more concerned about being top dog than our Doris's mental health. And she said, "I believe the garden safari has become too stressful for Mrs. Copeland, Doris, to handle. I wonder if it might be appropriate for her to rescind her application in order to preserve her state of mind." And that's where I thought my blood pressure would hit levels never seen in a white suburban middle-class male. Our Doris had told me what Violet Grey could be like, but to hear it with my own ears, to see a slightly lopsided smirk with another matter entirely, I said, "You'd like that, wouldn't you? Our Doris is offered to cousins and you're thinking I'm too much of a coward to offend her face to face. I'll go through her husband instead." Well, last I heard, Mrs. Grey, you stepped down as chair at Safari to stop your husband copping off with other birds, and I suggest you get back to it whilst our Doris puts on the biggest school reunion this town's ever seen. I slapped the door in her face before the well I never, but I was shaking. Partly because of Violet Grey, and partly because I now had to arrange a Doris Standard school reunion. Our Angela came in from the kitchen and said to me, she said, "What was all that about, Dad?" I said, "Get the lads on the phone, Angela." She walked away, and I hoped beyond hope they weren't paralytic. It took them the best part of 2 hours, but soon enough they'd reassembled themselves in the front room, mugs of coffee in their hands, looking worse fit wear. I stood there, hoping I were giving off the impression of a leader rather than a man under threat from his wife. I said to him, "Right, lads, I know our Doris ain't really flavour at a month, but I've had Violet Grey on me doorstep, and I've made some promises on our Doris's behalf, so I need your help." "What sort of promises?" Peter piped up. He was just managing to keep his head out the mop bucket. "He's promised a school reunion my mum would approve of," our Angela said, arms folded. She can be as domineering as a mother can, that one. And I know that she can be a bit heavy-handed at times, but can you imagine how she might react if she found out about the mess she left her house in this morning? Al said, "You wouldn't tell, would you, Angela?" She said, and this is where I'm proud of her, she deployed our Doris as she were meant to be deployed. a weapon, and it had put the fear of God in them. She said, "It depends on whether you can bring a buffet and guests to the church hall." The lads looked white. The threat of our Doris finding out how we used her home hung in the air like cowmuck in countryside. Peter said, "How long do we have?" Angela said, "Tonight." She must have noticed a look of terror on my face. It were as though I'd discovered a grenade beneath the petunias and didn't know how to get it out before it made a mess of our Doris's paving, because Angela looked at me and she said, "I've had a phone call. She's coming home." My heart entered my stomach. My mouth went dry as a Tory in the Gobi Desert, and I said, "She's going to kill me," as Al said. "We'll help, on the condition she doesn't find out we had any hand in the preparation." Angela nodded. "Done. Then let's get to work." I'd never seen them move as fast, not even when Al had a Stockwell skirt cut on a bit of netting and exposed a right buttock to a load of toddlers at the summer fete. Al says as he's getting set on the refreshments, and Peter said he'd go home and get some stuff. One of the lads asked if we needed any crockery, but this is the point I was adamant on. I said to him, "If our Doris sees any crockery that is not her own at the school reunion, then she'll tear out our spleens and make a stew to bring to the WI. I'll sort crockery, you get on organising church hall." "She'll want bunting," our Angela added as an afterthought. She wouldn't all. Our Doris has a thing about bunting. Says that it is a truly British decoration, and the fact it can be achieved from a few scraps of fabric means it's economic, which is exactly what we need in this day and age. I wish she'd been as thrifty about the dress she bought for our 30th wedding anniversary. Me and our Angela set about finding crystal champagne flutes and crockery for the tea and coffee. She went off to the church hall and I went to find me suit. Our Doris says as black doesn't suit me skin tone. Says as I look like an anemic Dracula, which is why I have the navy blue suit. The navy suit has stood me in good stead. When our Richard were getting married for the 5th time, our Doris had me buy it from Marks. Since then, it has been to 3 christenings, 1 more of Richard's weddings, and several funerals, one of them being Richard's. It's the only suit our Doris has had thrown away after the second wear. Usually they'd be at the charity shop by now. Sometimes I like to think it's because she's finally accepted me for who I am, but I think it's to do with the price of a last fur coat. Once I was dressed, our Angela came back and said to me, she said, "Make sure you apologise to her dad. Grovel. Do whatever you have to, because I'm not sure we can cope with any more of her madcap schemes." I said to her, "There's Christmas yet, our Angela." She said, "Don't remind me," and we left. It took a few minutes to get to the church hall, and the whole time I could feel my heart pumping that fast I thought it had finally come. Karma had caught up with me and I was being punished for offending our Doris. In that moment, I was thinking a cardiac arrest might be more appealing than our Doris's face on seeing the church hall half done. We only had a dozen old age pensioners trying to do what our Doris would normally spend months organising. The ladders were out and a few of the lads' families had stepped in to help. We had young folk tying bunting to the ceiling and others setting up trestle tables for the buffet. Thankfully, someone had reminded them that our Doris preferred the trestle tables because they emphasised that the church was in need of funding, as well as making sure that everyone knew she had better furnishings back at home, but she couldn't possibly accommodate so many in her small lounge. Not that she would ever complain about her house on Shakespeare Avenue. After 6 hours of work, the church hall looked magnificent. Well, it looked as well as church halls can look. The lights were dimmed to an appropriate level. Our Doris has a thing about dimmed lights at parties. Says as if she ever wanted to have entertained in the dark, she'd have become a lady of the night. But she still maintains there's something to be said for a light that casts the right hue over your guests so as you can't see every crevice on the face. A few of Alf's acquisitions were on the buffet table. Melton Mowbray pork pies, sausage rolls, a few trays of pâté and Jacob's crackers. He'd even gone as far as to get a few Thornton's chocolates and piled Ferrero Rocher on top of each other. Our Doris still maintains that Ferrero Rocher have something of a vintage quality about them that causes parties to become more of a social event, but I think it's because she's always had a thing for hazelnuts. Peter had brought a few bottles of his elderflower wine. They now sat alongside the bottle of Lambrusco and Schlur that Alf had managed to procure, no doubt from some off the back of her truck sources Edith wouldn't be too pleased to hear about. A whole host of folk filled the church hall. Old Ernie Osselthwaite sat with his missus throwing back the gin and tonics like they were Alka-Seltzers. I thought Yvonne Ackersley had emigrated, that Tabitha Quayle had died, but there they were, dancing around their handbags like they used to down at rugby club when they were lasses. Tabitha had something of a limp about her, so her twist looked more like she were trying to readjust her knickers, but it didn't matter because she were enjoying herself. We were all enjoying ourselves. And in the cloakroom, I saw her shrugging off her coat. Our Doris. She walked into the hall and stood there, a twinkle in her eye that could have been the glitter ball or cataracts. And it didn't matter because she looked $1,000,000. Starling silhouettes on a white dress and a hair freshly permed, and she had this come-hither look, the like of which I hadn't seen since bonfire night of 1994 when I set fire to an effigy of Carly Simon. I went over and she said to me, "It's come to my attention that you offended Violet Gray's bird-watching, our Harold." And I said, "I know nothing about bird-watching, but I had a go at her." "Our Angela says as you can't work the washing machine." "I'll have to teach you something. We can't have it getting out that Doris Copeland's husband doesn't know how to work a spin cycle." I look forward to it. Janice Dooley of Little Street approached with a pint of ale in one hand and a vol au vent in the other. She'd had a go at applying fake eyelashes and ended up looking like she glued moths to her eyelids. Her perfume were a mixture of Carlsberg and Dove deodorant. She and our Doris faced each other like the final showdown in a western. I could feel folks stealing glances across the hall, wondering whether they'd get a repeat of the great slanging match of New Year's 1967 when Janice met our Doris in the Gaston and Taylor car park. But this were tame. This were courteous. This were political. Janice started. She said to our Doris, "I'm right sorry, but I can't let you have a place at Garden Safari. I'm thinking of you, really I am." Our Doris looked every bit the hen with her back straight and nose in air. She spoke slow, drawling out her words. She said, "And how might that be?" You know things are bad when our Doris slows down her speech. When Mrs. Carsley told her she'd seen a pinafore that matched Doris's at Aldi, the speech slowed down that much I worried she'd had a stroke. "I think the stress would be too much, you being 72 after all." "I should imagine it's more stressful trying to keep your extramarital affairs a secret," our Doris said. "Now that's gossiping, Doris. You're hurt." Janice swigged from her pint, thinking she were in command of the situation. "All the stress of keeping this from my dear friend Violet." "She knows." Our Doris brought out the look, her eyes beaded, leaning in close to Janice as she asked, "I imagine she does, but if you want me to keep quiet, you'll give me fifth house. You'd prefer the public to know about my horticultural skills than what Violet Grey lets her husband get up to." "How do you know they're not splitting up?" "I risked the scandal. I knew you were a few sandwiches short of a full picnic, Janice, but I thought that even you might understand why you and Doug aren't sipping cocktails in the Seychelles." Our Doris held her head high, every inch the head girl, as she said, "Violet had never given you the safari if it weren't for you and Doug, so Fifth House, or the Gazette hears all about how Janice Dooley of Little Street should be awarded a Guinness World Record for the speed she can drop her knickers." I could practically hear the cogs whirring in Janice's head as she said, "I'll see what I can do." She lumbered off, vol au vent crushed in her hand. I turned to our Doris and said to her, "That were brilliant." "Vol au vents, Harold, really. Even Iceland were aware they're a pitiful excuse for a buffet."